He's the last man standing of a musical dynasty, the sole keeper of a legacy that sold upwards of 220 million records. But for Barry Gibb, survival can feel like a sentence of profound loneliness. He's the eldest, the leader, and now, the only one left to tell the story of the brothers Gibb. Before the world knew them as the Bee Gees, they were just three boys, harmonizing in a small room, their voices weaving together into a single, breathtaking sound. They shared a dream and a bond forged in childhood that felt unbreakable. That unity propelled them to the absolute peak of global stardom, making them kings of not one, but two different eras of popular music, but the same fame that crowned them also fractured their brotherhood, introducing rivalry, jealousy, and pressure that would ultimately leave deep, unhealed wounds. Today, Barry Gibb lives with the ghosts of his brothers, Andy, Maurice, and Robin. He carries the weight of their immense success and the crushing sorrow of their absence. He's confessed his greatest regret is that every brother he lost was at a time when they weren't on good terms, a burden he says he'll have to live with for the rest of his life. This is the story of that staggering loss, of the conflicts that tore a family apart, and of Barry Gibb's lonely journey as the last surviving Bee Gee, forever tasked with carrying their immortal legacy alone. Before the stadiums, the chart-topping hits, and the worldwide fame, there was simply the sound. It was a sound born not in a state-of-the-art recording studio, but in the modest confines of a family home. Born on the Isle of Man and raised in Manchester, England, Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb were bound by more than blood, they were bound by melody. Their father, Hugh Gibb, was a drummer and bandleader, and music was the air they breathed. From a very young age, the brothers discovered something magical when they sang together. It was an intuitive, almost telepathic connection. They didn't need to discuss it, they could just feel it. Their three distinct voices would merge into one, creating a tight, three-part harmony that was utterly unique. Barry, the eldest by 3 years, naturally fell into the leader's role. Robin, with his clear, emotive vibrato, often took the lead on their early ballads, his voice filled with a haunting melancholy. And Maurice, Robin's fraternal twin, was the quiet anchor, the musical wizard who could pick up any instrument and, crucially, the peacemaker who often bridged the gap between his two more competitive older brothers. Together, they were a self-contained universe of music. The family's early life was marked by struggle. They were, in Barry's own words, pretty poor. In search of a better life, the Gibb family emigrated to Australia in 1958. They settled in an area north of Brisbane, and it was here, under the Australian sun, that the Bee Gees truly began to take shape. As teenagers, they honed their craft playing in hotels and clubs, driven by a relentless ambition. Barry, showing the fierce dedication that would define his career, quit school to focus on music full-time. He became the group's primary songwriter, crafting melodies that showed a maturity far beyond his years. Even in these formative years, Barry's life was marked by a profound trial that would forge a deep resilience in him. When he was just under 2 years old, he suffered a horrific accident, pulling a pot of boiling tea over himself. He was so severely burned he spent about 2.5 months in the hospital. Barry has said that surviving this near-fatal ordeal gave him an inner strength, a kind of fortitude that would help him endure the unimaginable losses that lay in his future. The sound they were creating was a rich tapestry of their influences. They adored the Mills Brothers and later, the Beatles, but their hearts were always rooted in soul and R&B music. This unique blend set them apart. By 1967, their talent had become too big for Australia to hold. They decided to return to the UK, sending demo tapes ahead of them. Fatefully, one tape landed on the desk of Robert Stigwood, an impresario who worked with the Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein. Stigwood heard what the rest of the world would soon discover: these brothers weren't just a band, they were a musical force of nature. He signed them immediately, and the Bee Gees were on the precipice of their first great wave of fame, unaware of how that success would both elevate them to gods and tear at the very fabric of their brotherhood. When the Bee Gees landed back in England in 1967, London was swinging, and the music world was electric. Under Robert Stigwood's guidance, they were catapulted right into the heart of it. Their first international hit, New York Mining Disaster 1941, was a masterpiece of atmospheric storytelling. With its somber melody and cryptic lyrics, radio DJs famously mistook it for a new Beatles song, immediately giving the group an air of prestige. The hits came in a torrent after that, the soulful plea, To Love Somebody, originally written with Otis Redding in mind, and the sweeping ballad, Massachusetts, which became their first UK #1. They were barely out of their teens, and they had become global pop idols. The dream they had nurtured in Australia was now a reality, broadcast on radios and TV screens around the world. That uncanny, three-part harmony was their golden ticket. But as their fame grew, so did the cracks in their brotherhood. The unity that had been their greatest strength began to buckle under the weight of ego and ambition. The main source of tension was a growing rivalry between Barry and Robin. In the early days, their roles were fluid, but as the stakes got higher, so did the competition for the spotlight. Robin's distinctive, plaintive vocals had defined many of their early hits, but Barry, as the principal songwriter and a charismatic frontman, was also naturally seen as the leader. This created a classic power struggle. Maurice, ever the diplomat, did his best to mediate, but the friction was becoming unbearable. In a later interview, Barry reflected on this period with painful honesty. "The trouble with fame is it takes over everything and it makes you competitive," he said. "And if you're in a group you can't really compete against each other." But they did. The creative differences turned into deep-seated grudges. They were no longer just brothers making music, they were international stars keeping score. The breaking point came in 1969. At the height of their initial success, Robin, feeling his artistic voice was being sidelined, made the shocking decision to leave the group and pursue a solo career. The split was acrimonious and played out in the press. For a time, it seemed as if the Bee Gees were finished. Barry and Maurice tried to carry on as a duo, but the magic wasn't the same. The three-part harmony was their soul, and without one of its core components, the sound felt incomplete. Barry himself released a solo single, but it failed to make an impact. He admitted later that performing alone felt empty. "I miss people," he said, reflecting on the loneliness of being on stage without his brothers. That period of separation was a harsh lesson for all of them. Robin had some solo success, but as he'd later admit, it's not much fun when you're on your own. The bond they had, the creative alchemy they shared, was irreplaceable. After more than a year apart, they reconciled, but the fracture left a scar. It was the first time their brotherhood had broken, and it served as a dark premonition. They had learned their unity was fragile, and that the music industry could turn them against one another. They managed to mend the break, but the underlying tensions would simmer for decades, a dormant volcano that fame and tragedy would threaten to reawaken. The reunion of the Bee Gees in the early 1970s wasn't the triumphant return they'd hoped for. The musical landscape had shifted. The lush, orchestral pop that had made them stars was starting to sound dated. The industry that had crowned them kings now seemed indifferent. The brothers found themselves in a creative and commercial wilderness. Albums like Life in a Tin Can, 1973, and Mr. Natural, 1974, were met with resounding silence. They went from chart toppers to struggling to get their music on the radio. This period of failure was deeply painful. Barry later admitted that he and his brothers were torn apart by the pressures, with drugs and alcohol compounding their problems and nearly leading to another breakup. He confessed to crying many nights, believing their musical journey had reached a dead end. Their mentor, Robert Stigwood, was losing faith, and the band was on the verge of being dropped by their record label. It was a humbling, desperate time. In a last-ditch effort, Stigwood suggested a radical change of scenery. He encouraged them to move to Miami to soak in a different musical atmosphere. This move would prove to be the single most important turning point in their history. In Miami, they began working with legendary producer Arif Mardin, who had crafted hits for soul icons like Aretha Franklin. Martin saw the raw talent beneath their commercial slump and encouraged them to embrace the R&B and soul music they had always loved. During one of these sessions, while recording Nights on Broadway, Martin threw out a challenge: could any of them do a blood-curdling, Al Green-style scream in the background? Barry, known for his gentle tenor, gave it a try. But instead of a scream, what came out was something spectacular, a pure, powerful falsetto. No one in the room, least of all Barry, knew he was capable of that sound. It was a moment of pure, accidental genius. That falsetto became their secret weapon. It wasn't just a vocal trick, it was a total reinvention. It redefined their sound, injecting it with a fresh, rhythmic energy that was perfectly in sync with the burgeoning disco scene. Their next album, Main Course, 1975, was a stunning comeback. It featured the smash hit, Jive Talkin', a song whose rhythm Barry had conceived while driving over a Miami bridge, the clicking of the tires on the expansion joints creating the beat in his head. The album also showcased their new falsetto on hits like Nights on Broadway and Fanny, Be Tender with My Love. The Bee Gees were back. But they weren't the same band. They had been through the fire of failure and emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a completely new musical identity. They had rediscovered their groove, not by chasing trends, but by digging deeper into their own musical roots. Now, standing on the cusp of the disco era, they were about to experience a level of fame so colossal, it would make their first wave of success look like a ripple in a pond. They were about to become the undisputed kings of Saturday Night Fever. By 1977, the Bee Gees had firmly re-established themselves. They were working on a new album in France when Robert Stigwood called with an urgent request. He was producing a low-budget film about the disco scene in Brooklyn and needed a few songs for the soundtrack. The film was Saturday Night Fever. The brothers, deep into their own project, agreed to contribute 4 or 5 songs they had on hand. What happened next is the stuff of music legend. In a whirlwind of creative energy, they wrote the bulk of what would become one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time in a single weekend. Songs like Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and Night Fever seemed to pour out of them. Stayin' Alive, with its iconic walking beat and lyrics about survival, became an anthem for a generation. How Deep Is Your Love was a timeless ballad, and Night Fever perfectly captured the energy of the dance floor. When Saturday Night Fever was released, it wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural cataclysm. The film and its soundtrack ignited a global disco inferno. The Bee Gees were no longer just a popular band, they were the architects of a worldwide phenomenon. The soundtrack sold over 40 million copies, a staggering number that made it one of the highest-selling albums in history. Their chart dominance was absolute. In March of 1978, 5 of the top 10 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 were written by the Gibb brothers. This was a feat of chart supremacy not seen since the Beatles. Barry Gibb co-wrote 6 consecutive #1 singles in the U.S., tying a record held by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. They won 5 Grammy Awards for their work on the soundtrack, including the coveted Album of the Year. They were, without exaggeration, the biggest band in the world, but this unprecedented success was a double-edged sword. It was a blessing that brought them unimaginable wealth, but also a curse that tied them to a single genre. They became the faces of disco, their white suits and Barry's falsetto becoming symbols of the era. And when the inevitable backlash came, it was brutal. By the end of the decade, the "disco sucks" movement had gained momentum. Radio stations that had played their music non-stop began to ban it. The Bee Gees went from celebrated to derided. Almost overnight, the rejection was devastating. They had become victims of their own monumental success. For a while, it seemed their careers as artists were over once again. But the brothers were, above all, songwriters. During the early 80s, they retreated from the spotlight and became a hit-making factory for other artists. They penned the classic "Islands in the Stream" for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, Woman in Love, for Barbra Streisand, and Heartbreaker, for Dionne Warwick. This period was a testament to their incredible versatility. In a way, this forced hiatus was a personal blessing. Barry later said these years, when they were raising their families out of the public eye, were some of the happiest of their lives. But the whiplash of Saturday Night Fever, from global domination to public pariah, left a lasting mark. It reinforced the fickle nature of fame and added another complex layer to their turbulent story. While the Bee Gees navigated the dizzying heights of global fame, another Gibb was carving his own path to stardom. Andy Gibb, the youngest brother, was blessed with the same charismatic looks and musical talent. He wasn't officially a Bee Gee, but he was very much a part of the family's musical dynasty. With Barry's songwriting help, Andy's solo career exploded. He became the first male solo artist to have his first 3 singles reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with hits like I Just Want to Be Your Everything and Love Is Thicker Than Water. Andy was a teen idol, a fixture on magazine covers. He had it all: youth, fame, and talent. But beneath the surface, he was struggling with the immense pressures of stardom, battling severe insecurity and a growing addiction to cocaine. His struggles mirrored the darker side of fame his brothers had also experienced, but for Andy, the fall was faster and more tragic. Barry, acting as a protective older brother, tried desperately to help. He watched in agony as Andy's life spiraled out of control. The family's attempts to intervene were met with resistance. Barry recalled a haunting night when Andy, terrified and high, called him in a panic. He found his youngest brother curled up in a closet, broken and sobbing. I just held him, Barry remembered. He was our baby. And we let him die. I couldn't fix him. That feeling of helplessness would haunt Barry for the rest of his life. His last conversation with Andy had been a difficult one, an attempt at tough love that only seemed to push him further away. The professional consequences of Andy's addiction were severe. He was fired from TV gigs and his recording career stalled. By the mid-1980s, despite his family's efforts, the damage was profound. In March of 1988, just days after his 30th birthday, Andy Gibb died. The official cause was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. While years of drug abuse had severely weakened his heart and undoubtedly contributed to his death, it wasn't a direct overdose. But the distinction offered little comfort. The family was shattered. Andy's death was the first great tragedy to strike the Gibbs, the first ghost to join their table. For Barry, the loss was compounded by a deep sense of guilt. He was the eldest, the one who was supposed to look out for his siblings. It was a wound that would never fully heal, a sorrow buried deep beneath their continued success, and a stark reminder of the human cost of the world they inhabited. They had conquered the music world, but they couldn't save one of their own. The loss of Andy in 1988 forever altered the Gibb family dynamic. It was a sorrow that bonded the 3 remaining brothers in a new, more somber way. They continued to record and tour through the 1990s, producing successful albums and reaffirming their status as one of music's most enduring acts. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997, a moment of triumph celebrating their incredible journey. For a time, it seemed the worst was behind them, but fate wasn't finished. In January of 2003, Maurice Gibb, the quiet, steady heart of the group, was admitted to a Miami hospital with severe stomach pains. While awaiting surgery for a twisted intestine, he suffered a massive heart attack and died. He was only 53. The death was so sudden, so unexpected, it left everyone reeling. Maurice was the great harmonizer, not just vocally, but socially. He was the glue that held the often clashing personalities of Barry and Robin together. Suddenly, he was gone. Barry later described the feeling as being like someone had just unplugged him. He and Robin had lost their twin, their anchor, their brother. In the wake of Maurice's death, Barry and Robin announced they were retiring the name, the Bee Gees. They felt the name represented the 3 of them together, and to continue without Maurice would be unthinkable. The pain of Maurice's death was still raw when the next tragedy began to unfold. Robin, who had spiraled into a deep grief, was diagnosed with cancer. He chose to fight the battle largely in private. This period was fraught with the old, familiar tensions. In a heartbreaking confession, Barry later revealed that he and Robin weren't on good terms during his brother's final years. They had drifted apart, clashing over the band's legacy. Their final exchange had ended in anger over the phone. Barry never called back, thinking they'd have more time to fix things. Robin Gibb died in May of 2012 at the age of 62. His death wasn't as sudden as Maurice's, but for Barry, it cut even deeper. He was now the only one left. The trio that had once felt like a single being had been extinguished. The loss was magnified by a crushing weight of regret. Barry admitted he wasn't really speaking to Maurice when he passed away, either. "My greatest regret is that every brother I've lost was in a moment when we were not getting on," he confessed. The unresolved conflicts, the anger that had lasted too long, the goodbyes that were never said, this became his solitary burden. He was the last man standing, a frontman without his band, a brother without his brothers. Today, Barry Gibb lives in a world populated by memories and ghosts. He is the patriarch of a large and loving family, with his wife Linda, 5 children, and numerous grandchildren. Yet, he's also the sole survivor of the musical force that defined his life. In interviews, his sense of loss is palpable. "I'm the last man standing," he has said. "I'll never be able to understand that, because I'm the eldest." The weight of being the last keeper of the flame is immense. He has spoken of a survivor's guilt, a profound question of, "Why me?" that lingers. He feels the presence of his brothers constantly. When he's on stage, he says he can still see them, can almost smell their breath around the microphone they all used to share. This connection is both a comfort and a curse. This pain has made it difficult for him to look back. The 2020 HBO documentary, The Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, was a moving tribute to their legacy, but one Barry admitted he couldn't bring himself to watch. Reliving those memories, seeing his brothers vibrant and alive, was simply too painful. His deepest regret remains the state of his relationships when his brothers died. "I have to live with that," he confessed. He understands their unhappiness better now, acknowledging that perhaps he received too much attention while Robin and Maurice didn't get enough. This clarity, born of hindsight and grief, offers no absolution, only a deeper understanding of the fractures fame inflicted upon their family. Despite his own physical frailties, including severe arthritis, he has found a way to carry the legacy forward. He now collaborates with his sons, Stephen and Ashley, who give him the fire to keep going. He has toured with his son Stephen on guitar and his niece, Maurice's daughter Samantha, by his side, transforming the Bee Gees' legacy into a true family affair. He released the album Greenfields in 2021, and some reports in early 2025 mentioned a new album titled Timeless Harmonies and an accompanying tour. Though official, widespread announcements for these new projects remain pending. The story of the Bee Gees is a saga of staggering highs and unimaginable lows. It's about how 3 boys from Manchester, armed with little more than a dream and a supernatural ability to harmonize, conquered the world not once, but twice. They crafted a songbook for the ages, their melodies becoming part of the fabric of our culture, but behind the shimmering success was the deeply complex and often fractured bond of 3 brothers. Fame, the very thing they chased, became a corrosive force, fueling rivalries that left wounds that never healed. Then came the tragedies, one after another, until only one brother remained. Barry Gibb's life today is the final, poignant chapter. He is a symbol of survival, but also a man living with profound loss, carrying the weight of all that was left unsaid. Every time he sings, "How Deep Is Your Love" or "Stayin' Alive," he's not just performing a song, he is communing with his brothers, keeping their spirits alive in the only way he knows how. His journey is a heartbreaking exploration of the price of fame, the power of family, and the crushing loneliness of being the last man standing. The harmonies are gone, but for Barry Gibb, the melody, and the memory, will play on forever. For more stories about music's greatest legends and the incredible lives they lived, subscribe to our channel.